Good morning. It is still dark here even. We are still in the third section of the Transfiguration. It's the last section. We're going to finish it up this morning. And then we'll move on to the crucifixion. But I'm just going to read this last line, one of these last lines from yesterday, just to kind of set this off and get us thinking right away that that world rejection always precedes world acceptance. Delusionment is a stage on the way to reality. The hatred of those who are not yet ready to recognize the world of spiritual values is ever the lot of those who are. This Christ faced, and yet he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. I think that's something that, if we're going to follow in Christ's footsteps, we're all going to experience. And certainly that seems to happen rather quickly, I want to say. And there's energetic reasons for that are explained in some of the other books, particularly Raising Initiations and a treatise on white magic, to where our energy does have an effect on our environment, and it can bring forth both the best and the worst in people, even in just passing by. So that's this is something that I just read actually a couple hours ago again, and I think that it's this is why we need to know this stuff. We need to know what our energy is doing, and we're far more powerful than we believe, even when we don't see it ourselves. Just as the energy is working through us, it's about learning how to work with the energy. As we consider these happenings, the particular test which Christ now encountered becomes clear in our minds. It was again a threefold test, as was that after the baptism initiation, but this time it was of a far subtler nature. And subtle always being key of understanding when it comes to these things. I want to say you can always look deeper. It's always more subtle. It's always more clear than we initially think. And as we look at things with our own, from our own personality, subtle is always really a good answer to going deeper. He was faced with the test as to whether he could endure and handle worldly success and pass along the triumphant way of his entry into the holy city without deviating from his purpose, without being attracted by material achievement and by being acclaimed king of the Jews. Success constitutes a far more drastic disciplining and produces many more opportunities to forget God and reality than do failure and neglect. Self-pity, a sense of martyrdom, and resignation are potent and effective ways of handling one's failure. But to rise upon the crest of the wave, to be accorded public recognition, and to seem to have achieved the earthly goal are far more difficult factors to face. These Christ did face, and he faced them with spiritual poise and with that far-sighted wisdom which produces a correct sense of values and a proper sense of proportion. The second phase of the test lay in his prevision as to his end. He knew he had to die, and he knew how he would die, and yet he went forward undeviatingly upon the course assigned him, although prevision of disaster was his. Not only had he to demonstrate the power to endure success, but he had also to demonstrate the power to face disaster, balancing the two against each other and seeing in both of them simply opportunities for divine expression and fields for the demonstration of detachment. That outstanding characteristic of the man who has been born again, purified, and transfigured. To these tests was added the one which he had before encountered in the desert, the test of utter loneliness, the power to endure success, the power to endure disaster, the power to stand utterly alone. This Christ had to show the world, and this he did. He stood triumphant before the world at an intermediate stage on his way to the cross. The agony of loneliness in the Garden of Gethsemane was probably a far harder moment for him than the publicity on Mount Golgotha. That's something very interesting there. And in my mind, I think that once he knew and found out in that moment, it must have been very profound. And then by the time he had gotten to Mount Golgotha, it would have been far generally accepted in his consciousness. The immediate response being more powerful. But in these more subtle tests, the quality of God himself was revealed, and it is God's quality and meaning which saved the world, the quality of his life, which is love and wisdom and value and reality. It was all of this which Christ accomplished. Immediately on the descent from the mountaintop, Christ began again to serve. He was met, as well we know, by a person in distress, and he at once responded to the need. One of the outstanding characteristics of each initiation is the increased capacity and ability to initiate to serve. He was met, as well we know, by a person in distress, and he at once responded to the need. One of the outstanding characteristics of each initiation is the increased capacity and ability of the initiate to serve. Christ demonstrated an entirely new and unique way in which to speak and to meet the masses, as well as to teach privately and personally his chosen few. His power to heal still continued, but his work shifted into a field of values, and he spoke those words and enunciated those truths which have proved the foundation of the belief of those who have had the insight to penetrate the theological presentation of Christianity and there find reality. His service consisted primarily at the time in teaching and speaking, but such is the wisdom and the beauty of his presentation of truth, he couched divinity in forms which the average man could grasp. He bridged the old and the new and gave out the new truth and that special revelation which were needed at the time to unite the ancient wisdom and the more modern hope. Kursling, again, we're going to reference him, has grasped the wonder of what the world's Savior does and voices it in words which I quote, "The great mind is essentially the awakener. If such a mind were to utter the entirely new, the unique, this would mean nothing to other men. His social value depends entirely on his ability to utter clearly what all feel in their innermost hearts to be true, for could he otherwise be understood? And to utter it in so universal a manner that is so much in tune with the objective laws in question that his ideas become organs for the others." And that's from a book called The Recovery of Truth. Christ gave us a great idea. He gave us the new concept that God is love. No matter what might be happening in the world of immediacy, all great ideas come forth from the world of divinity through the medium of the great intuitives, and the history of humanity is essentially the history of ideas. They're coming forth through the medium of some intuitive thinker, their recognition by the few, their growth in popularity, and their eventual integration in the thought world, the pattern world of thinkers of the race. Then their fate is determined, and eventually the new and unique ideas become the popularly and publicly accepted model of human conduct. The question then, whether it is personalities or ideas which decide the fate of an age, the answer is that the age get its ideas from personalities. Very interesting. And let me just mark where this is here. That's from a book called The Decay and Restoration of Civilization by Albert Schweitzer. But what I wanted to say there is, in the Ageless Wisdom, it's noted that ideas can, they spread and it becomes an ideal. And as it takes hold in more minds, it becomes larger and larger. It's contagious in a way, brought by the thinkers and those with power to spread that. And it's picked up on, and then the idea becomes an ideal. And they could be good or bad, and just good or bad is very dual, but it can go either way. It can be anything. Christ embodied a great idea, the idea that God is love, and that love is the motivating power of the universe. This constitutes the illumination which Christ, as the light of the world, refracted upon all world events. The majesty of this realization cannot be overemphasized. We need to realize it far more deeply and potently than we do, for it constitutes the basic fundamental character and quality of all events, no matter what the outer appearance may be. And that right there is key. What we, see as outer events, we ultimately need to look for the inner meaning, which is found on the mental plane. Christ illumines life. This was one of his most important contributions to life as it is lived today. He said, in effect, God loves the world. All that happens is along the line of love. If this is realized as fact and fundamental truth, it illumines all of life and lightens all burdens. Cause and effect are brought together, and God's purpose and his method are seen as one. And I think we definitely, I want to say a lot of us, I don't say a lot of us, I guess we all will go through the phase where we begin to recognize ourselves as love. We see where love is coming from, it's pouring through us. And then we recognize that love is much broader and ultimately much broader than we had originally thought earlier on, because in meaning you can see love in all of the events happening around the world, and by studying the Ageless Wisdom, you can see where this goes. And as our consciousness awakens or expands, the plan becomes much more clear. And and it makes the little individual events in terms of the whole look less significant, right? So if we start looking at the big picture, we can understand more of this. Like if we look at the Bible in terms of one verse, we're going to get it wrong. If we take the time to study and we grasp the big picture of it, it all makes it creates a much larger picture. And this is 2,000 years ago, and this extends much, further beyond today. Theologians have often forgotten this, and they have struggled over the more technical aspects of Christ's life. What he illumined in his function as the light of the world, what he received of divine light and poured forth for the world, what he refracted is often overlooked in the struggle to prove such doctrines as the fact that the Virgin Mary was an immaculate virgin and Christ was therefore born through the medium of an immaculate conception. Today, only a few of the younger generation care much about such points of doctrine. Let us state that quite emphatically, but we do care that the love which he expressed should be demonstrated in the world, and that the illumination he carried should lighten our darkness. And from our generation and those in incarnation today, I think that should hit home to all of us. Right? We want to know more. This is what we need to hear, these deeper understandings. Our minds have been awakened to the point where we can begin to grasp this now. And once we get this, then we can move on to the even deeper things. And it goes very deep, but it will be synthesized in our being if we focus on it and start to push off the rest of the world. And I can attest to that. I never thought that I would be able to understand many of these things that synthesize and become assimilated in the brain. I never had any desire to read much anything else. It started with the gospel, and it grew from there. And the focus has been spiritual, but the ageless wisdom goes very, very deep. And we have the ability to go very deep, and it's something that we should be taking advantage of at this point, because it's here for us. Many of these things were secret up until not that far into the past. Christ sounded with clarity the note which can usher in the new civilization and the new order, and a close study of the ideals and ideas which today, without exception, underlie every one of the great experiments undertaken by the various nations will show that they are based, in essence, upon some definitely Christ-like concept. That their method of application and the techniques employed are frequently unchristlike is sadly true, but the foundational concepts will bear with equanimity the light which Christ can throw upon them. The principal difficulty has been that our intellectual grasp of the concepts run ahead of our own personal development, and therefore colors disastrously our application of them. When these basic ideas are transmuted into world ideals by the consecrated thinkers of the race and applied in the spirit in which Christ conceived of them, then we shall indeed inaugurate a new world order. And this is, like I said, this is not the new world order that's talked about today. This is the light side of this. This is, if you want to say that, there's a good team and and a bad team, or a light team and a dark team, or a white lodge and a black lodge, then this is the positive polarity of that, because this is, there's polarity in everything. There's no getting around it, and that's something that can be appreciated as well, and it should be appreciated as well, because these things are necessary, and that's why it's so important to see the bigger picture. It is of supreme value for us to realize that what Christ really did was to usher in the era of service. Even if we are only beginning today, 2,000 years after he set us an example, to grasp the implications of that word so widely used. We have been apt to regard salvation in terms of the individual and to study it from the angle of individual salvation. This attitude must end if we are ever to understand the Christ spirit. And I want to say, a contemplation on Christ in the many is huge here. The risen living Christ alive in this instant and in the many is very profound, and that is an awakening and an expansion in and of itself. A great Japanese asks the poignant question, what is the primary aim of a religion worthy of existence? And goes on to tell us that it is salvation, but a salvation that is pregnant with relief and redress of life and of the world. And that's from a book called Modern Trends in World Religions, quoting Kishio Satomi. Christianity is not the only soteriological religion where salvation is is a primary concern. There are others, and I don't think we don't need to get into that, and I don't remember all of it. But bhakti yoga is a good example. It's the yoga of devotion. Service is becoming more and more an objective in all human affairs. Even modern business is coming to the recognition that it must be a motivating agency if business, as we understand it in the modern sense, is to survive. Upon what is this general trend based? Surely upon our universal relation to deity and upon our subjective relationships to each other, which have their root in our relationship to God. The concept of business, or this is discussed very deeply in the Ageless Wisdom. These books were written from the early 1920s, although the work I believe was started before that, and don't quote me on this, but it went into the 50s, I want to say. So, and this obviously coming from a much higher perspective, as from Master DK, and given to Alice Bailey, and business was a major concern. Money is a major concern. The use of money in preparation for the return of Christ is a major concern. Our greed on the physical plane is of major concern. It's for the thinkers of the world and those disciples and aspirants, I want to say, or initiates, to begin to transform the business world because nobody says that, money's not necessary. It's the greed that is really messing things up. Right. So in a new world, money will be used with a sense of divinity. And they say money is the crystallization of prana and is divine, and it should be used as such. Right? And our money is provided to us for our own spiritual growth and the spiritual growth of those that we can help with it. So there's that. Upon what is this general trend based? Surely upon our universal relation to deity, upon the subjective relationships to each other, which have their root in our relationship to God. That, of course, is the basis of service. It must be, as it was in the case of Jesus Christ, a spontaneous outcome of divinity. One of the strongest arguments for the divine unfoldment of man is the emergence on a large scale of this tendency to serve. We are just beginning to get a faint vision of what Christ meant by service. He carried this actuating motive of service to the extent of saying that when the common good and your personal success or welfare conflicted, you must sacrifice and not sacrifice the other man. And that's from a book called Modern Trends in World Religions. And, that really hits home. There's passages in the gospel that kind of reference that concept, that idea. This idea of service is, of course, in complete conflict with the usually competitive attitude to life and the selfishness generally shown by the average man. But to the man who seeks to follow Christ and who aims eventually at climbing the Mount of Transfiguration, service leads inevitably to increased illumination, and illumination in its turn must find its expression in renewed and consecrated service, and thus we find our way through service to our fellow men into the way that Christ trod. Following in his steps, we achieve eventually the power to live as illumined and Christ-like men and women in our normal everyday surroundings. And yeah, it's another interesting thing. We often think about enlightenment and we think of India probably, or running off to find a guru in India, or sitting in a cave, or going on silent retreats, or there's many other things that I'm not going to talk about today that we do, that our friends are doing, that is very astral in nature. But our normal everyday surroundings is where we are to function and to serve, and first learn to do it, as we talked about earlier in the book, inside of ourself, in our immediate surroundings and our families, and then it can spread from there. But until we've learned to bring our life into order out of chaos, essentially, and that chaos comes, it is known to come, it's part of the journey, and that comes quickly after the birth, where we're immediately thrown back into materialism in order to, I don't want to say defeat it, but learn to use it properly. But that brings with it a lot of issues. So yeah, our normal everyday surroundings, this is where we're to function and operate. We're born in the United States. This was not an accident. It's not something to run from. This is how, this is our field of service. What therefore is the gift that each of us can make to the world as we study the life of Christ and travel with him in our minds? What is it from one initiation to another? What therefore is the gift that each of us can make to the world as we study the life of Christ and travel with him? We can aim at the greatness in action, which will redeem our natural mediocrity and reveal progressively the divinity in each of us. Each can stand as a beacon of light, pointing the way to the center from which the word goes forth. And each can begin to express in his daily living some of the quality of God which Christ so perfectly portrayed and which carried him in triumph from the Mount of Transfiguration down to the valley of duty, again, as we talked about earlier, and of service, and which enabled him to go forward with staunch determination to the cross experience through the triumphal way of acclamation and the sorrowful ways of desertion and of loneliness. So there are, phases to this. There are stages and phases. It's graduated. There's changes that take place. There's transformations and transmutations and fusions, and there's many things going on all at once here as these energies. And besides this external happenings, there are energies being fused and moved and on the in our etheric body and our centers, our spiritual centers, and there's shifts being made that cause these disruptions. So this is and this is a reflection of the planetary happenings and the happenings of the solar system as well, and it's astrologically related in some sense. So there's so much going on. We have to understand the foundation so we can start to see the deeper happenings. But yes, the inner happenings result in an outer expression. And this is what we're essentially studying right now, is the outer appearance of what had happened. But the ageless wisdom, again, not only explains the outer expression, it also is the esoteric explanations of what is happening. And these are all things that we can know in our being for ourselves after studying them and being aware of our own experience and our being aware of our own lives on a daily basis and paying much more attention to ourselves. The impulse is strong to close with some words of Arjuna spoken to Krishna long before the Christian era, after the revelation of the unveiled beauty to which he had been admitted. Their relevance is unquestionable. One can almost imagine St. Peter or St. John saying them to Christ when they opened their eyes and saw Jesus only. Perhaps they may apply to us also as we consider Christ and our relation to him. All right, let's see about this here. This is some words of Arjuna spoken to Krishna. If thinking thee my comrade, I address thee brusquely, not knowing this greatness of thine, or carelessly, or through affection, or whatever I have done to make a jest of thee, unseemly, in journeying, resting, or seated, or at the banquet, whether alone, O fallen one, unfallen one. And there it seems like he's kind of making some sort of apology or making some sort of statement that he may have been wrong, which we are. or in presence of these. For all this I ask forgiveness from thee, immeasurable one. Thou art the Father of the world, of things moving and unmoving. Thou art worthy of honor, the reverend teacher of the world. None equal thee. How could any be greater? Even in the three worlds, there is none like thee in might. So that's what he was doing in that initial statement there, and that's where it went. He's admitting his, his vulgarness, his earlier vulgarness or profaneness, or his, when he was a mocker or a jester, essentially, right? Therefore, bowing down, prostrating my body before thee, I seek thy grace, O worthy Lord, as the Father, his Son, the comrade, his comrade, the beloved, his beloved, so deign thou, Lord, to pardon me. I exult, beholding what was never seen before, and my heart trembles with fear. Show me, Lord, the former form, Lord of gods, be gracious, upholder of worlds. So it seems like Arjuna has, prepared himself to some extent there for sure. And that's from the Bhagavad Gita again. And that is that's a very interesting book to read. You can see the divinity in the the story, in the book. It's deep. It could be attached to the Bible in a lot of ways. I was reading that about, I don't know if I had mentioned this before, but I was reading it about 4 years ago or so. And as I was reading the Bhagavad Gita, I knew that somebody, because I was reading the Bible heavily, but I knew that somebody reading the Bhagavad Gita in India was having the same experience as a Christian reading the Bible to an extent. And I mean, to an extent, when you're a seeker, you're a seeker. So reading the Bhagavad Gita, reading the Bible, it's both bringing up this, brought out a lot of emotions. And in doing so, it also allowed me to understand that this is a much bigger picture than I had originally thought. I knew then that this is all really going towards one direction. Oh, well, there you go. That I didn't even realize it, but that is the end of the Transfiguration. That was just a short couple pages, but it's such a deep. The third initiation is the Transfiguration is recognized by the masters as the first major initiation, with the birth and the baptism leading up to the third, which is really the first significant one, because it's a culminating event, and there's the expansions of consciousness that had come at the first and second and throughout have now grown into one larger expansion, essentially. I mean, it just continues, but this is the big one for us, because our view is apparently much more complete to a certain point. And again, this is all worthy of much more studying. All of these initiations up to this point are discussed heavily in Raising Initiations. And a treatise on white magic is designed to get the disciple through the second initiation. And you could, which would be, another good book to start on probably after this, unless we're unless we're really focused on Christianity. The Reappearance of the Christ is a short but very powerful book. And I may read that one here soon, but then we're already doing a treatise on white magic as well. Although I'm going to continue reading the rest of this book, so that we can grasp the whole gospel story. For the majority of us in incarnation now, they say that the first two initiations are what we're primarily dealing with. And I'm sure some are moving towards the Transfiguration. So the rest of this book, as we read it, is going to be, to grasp the gospel story from a more zoomed out perspective. But after that, I would say we'll dig into probably the Reappearance of the Christ, or we should go into a treatise on white magic from here. And then, there's an order in which these books should be read. And Esoteric Psychology is a good book. And it's that book, those books, Esoteric Psychology 1 and 2, are designed for the initiate of the first degree. So those are definitely good books to put into the toolbox and absorb that content. But yeah, we're going to continue on with this. And y'all have a great weekend. I know you're not watching this on the weekend. I don't know why I say those things, but thank you. Have a good one, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.